The spring storms had transformed Elk Creek into something unrecognizable, a violent, churning mass of water that devoured its banks and roared with frightening power. The normally gentle stream that wound peacefully through the rural community now raged like a wild beast, swollen by 3 days of relentless downpour. Martin Chen drove slowly along the muddy access road, wipers struggling against the rain that continued to fall in sheets. His family's small riverside cabin had been in their possession for generations, weathering many storms, but this flooding was unprecedented. "Just need to check the foundation and make sure nothing's floating away," he muttered to himself, squinting through the rain-spattered windshield. He parked on higher ground and pulled his rain jacket hood tight around his face before stepping out into the deluge. The roar of the creek was deafening, drowning out even the sound of the rain hammering on his hood. Martin carefully made his way down the slippery path toward his cabin, testing each step on the increasingly saturated ground. The cabin appeared to be holding firm, though water now lapped at the edge of the raised foundation, just inches from breaching the first floor. Martin took several photos to send to his wife, who had insisted he check on their beloved retreat. As he turned to head back to his truck, a sound cut through the thundering water, high-pitched, desperate, unmistakably an animal in distress. Martin paused, turning his head to locate the source. The cry came again, more urgent this time. "Hello," Martin called out instinctively, though he knew an animal wouldn't respond to his voice. He moved cautiously toward the sound, pushing through rain-soaked underbrush and ducking under low-hanging branches heavy with water. The path took him downstream from his cabin to a small clearing where the creek widened. The sight that greeted him made him freeze in shock. In the middle of the raging creek, on a partially submerged boulder, stood a large German shepherd. The dog's dark fur was plastered to its trembling body, and its eyes were wide with terror as water surged around the rock, threatening to sweep it away with each new wave. "Oh my God," Martin breathed, immediately pulling out his phone. The dog spotted him and let out another cry, part howl, part desperate bark. It tried to move toward the shore but quickly retreated as water splashed over the rock's edge, nearly carrying it away. Martin dialed emergency services, praying for a signal despite the remote location. After 2 attempts, the call connected. "911, what's your emergency?" came the dispatcher's steady voice. "There's a dog stranded in Elk Creek," Martin explained quickly, "near the Riverside Cabins area. It's on a rock in the middle of the creek, but the water's rising fast. It's going to drown if someone doesn't help soon." "Are you in any danger, sir?" the dispatcher asked. "No, I'm safe on shore, but this dog doesn't have much time. The boulder it's on is almost underwater." "I understand your concern, sir," the dispatcher said, her tone sympathetic but professional. "Unfortunately, all our rescue teams are currently deployed handling evacuations from the flooded areas downstream in Riverdale. There are families trapped, and we're prioritizing human life at the moment." Martin watched as another surge of water washed over the rock, momentarily submerging the dog's legs. The German shepherd scrambled to maintain its position, its movements becoming more panicked. "How long before someone could get here?" he pressed. "It might be several hours before we can get someone out there," she said apologetically. "I can put in the request, but with the current situation downstream—" Martin looked back at the stranded dog, calculating how quickly the water was rising. "That dog doesn't have hours," he said, both to himself and to the dispatcher. "I need to try something now." "Sir, I strongly advise against entering the water yourself," the dispatcher warned. "The current is extremely dangerous and—" "I understand," Martin interrupted. "I'll be careful. Thanks for your help." He ended the call and pocketed his phone, mind racing through possibilities. The creek was about 30 feet wide at this point, the current visibly strong as it carried branches and debris downstream at alarming speeds. Swimming would be suicide. A rope might work, but he didn't have one long enough in his truck, and even if he did, how would he secure it around a terrified dog? The German shepherd howled again, the sound piercing Martin's heart. Its eyes seemed to be locked directly on him, pleading for help that he didn't know how to provide. "Hold on, buddy," Martin called out, knowing the dog couldn't understand but feeling compelled to offer some reassurance. "I'm going to get you out of there." He quickly assessed what he had available. In his truck, some tools, a first aid kit, a few bottles of water, and his phone. Nothing that would help him cross raging floodwaters or rescue a stranded animal. Martin took several photos of the dog's predicament and quickly composed a post on the community's emergency response social media page. German, Shepherd, stranded on rock in Elk Creek near Riverside Cabins. Water rising fast. Need help now. He attached one of the clearest photos and his exact location, then hit send, praying that someone nearby would see it and have resources he lacked. While waiting for responses, Martin continued to call encouragement to the dog, who was now standing in water up to its ankles as more of the boulder disappeared beneath the rising creek. The animal's cries had become less frequent. Either it was conserving energy or becoming too exhausted to continue calling for help. His phone buzzed with notifications as community members began responding to his post. Most offered prayers or suggestions, but one message stood out. "I'm 10 minutes away with rescue equipment. Hold tight. Rebecca Torres." Martin recognized the name. She was a volunteer firefighter who lived on the other side of the creek. The relief that flooded through him was immediately tempered by concern about the time. Looking at the boulder, he estimated that at the current rate of water rise, the dog might have 20 minutes at most before the rock was completely submerged. "Help is coming," he called to the German Shepherd. "Just a little longer." The dog's ears perked up at his voice, but its body continued to tremble, partly from cold and partly from fear. Martin kept talking, hoping his voice might provide some comfort or distraction from the terrifying situation. 5 minutes passed. 10. The water now reached the dog's knees, forcing it to constantly adjust its position on the shrinking surface of the boulder. Martin felt helpless, watching as the animal's safe haven disappeared inch by inch. Finally, he heard the sound of a vehicle approaching on the access road. Moments later, Rebecca Torres appeared at the edge of the clearing, carrying rope and what looked like a flotation device. "Martin," she called, quickly making her way to his position. "Over here. Thank God you're here," he replied, pointing toward the creek where the dog remained stranded. Rebecca assessed the situation with trained eyes, her expression growing grave as she observed the current's strength and the dog's precarious position. "No way we can reach him from shore," Rebecca assessed, studying the raging current. "And if we wait for the water to bring him to us?" She didn't need to finish the thought. If the dog was swept away, its chances of survival were virtually non-existent. "What equipment did you bring?" Martin asked, eyeing the gear she'd carried from her truck. Rebecca laid out her resources: 2 lengths of rope, a personal flotation device, a rescue helmet, and a first aid kit. "Not enough for this situation," she admitted. "I wasn't expecting the current to be this strong." The German Shepherd let out another desperate cry as a fresh surge of water washed over the rock, now submerging it up to mid-leg. The dog scrambled to maintain its footing on the increasingly smaller exposed surface. "We need more help," Rebecca decided, pulling out her radio. She quickly called for additional resources from the volunteer fire department, but received the same answer Martin had gotten from emergency services. All units were deployed downstream, handling evacuations. "We're on our own," she told Martin grimly. Martin's phone buzzed with new notifications, more responses to his social media post. "Maybe not," he said, scanning the messages. "People are coming. Tom and Leah from the hardware store doctor, Patel from the vet clinic, and, this is good, Steve Watkins. He's a retired river guide." Rebecca's expression brightened slightly. "More hands and more expertise? That'll help." They kept their eyes on the stranded dog while waiting for the additional help to arrive. The German Shepherd was visibly tiring, its movements becoming less coordinated as it fought to stay on the rapidly disappearing boulder. "Hey there, buddy," Martin called, trying to keep his voice encouraging. "Help is coming. Just hold on a little longer." The dog's ears perked at his voice, but its eyes remained wide with fear, darting between the humans on shore and the threatening water all around. 10 minutes later, Tom and Leah Schmidt's pickup truck pulled up on the access road, followed closely by Dr. Patel's SUV. All three hurried down to the creek, carrying additional supplies. "We brought rope, a ladder, and some other things that might help," Tom explained, setting down a large bag of hardware store supplies. Dr. Patel carried a medical kit and several blankets. "For when we get him out," she explained. "He'll be hypothermic and probably in shock." Martin quickly briefed the newcomers on the situation while Rebecca organized the growing inventory of rescue equipment. The dog continued to fight for balance on the boulder, now standing in water almost to its chest. "Could we form a human chain?" Leah suggested, eyeing the creek's width dubiously. "Current's too strong," Rebecca replied. "We'd just end up with multiple people in danger." "What about extending the ladder from shore?" Tom proposed. Martin and Rebecca exchanged glances. "It's worth trying," Martin agreed, "but I don't think it'll reach all the way." They quickly set up Tom's extension ladder, securing it as best they could on the muddy bank. As predicted, even fully extended, it fell short of the boulder by nearly 10 feet. "We could tie ropes to it, maybe create a makeshift bridge," Leah suggested. Before they could implement this plan, another vehicle arrived. Steve Watkins, the retired river guide, along with 3 more community members who'd seen Martin's post. Steve took one look at the situation and immediately offered an alternative. "I have an inflatable kayak in my truck. The current's too strong for a direct approach, but if we secure lines from both shores, I might be able to reach him." The group mobilized quickly, helping Steve retrieve and inflate his kayak while Rebecca worked out a system of guide ropes. The plan was for Steve to enter the water upstream, using the ropes to control his trajectory toward the boulder. Dr. Patel prepared her medical supplies, ready to receive the dog once rescued. "He looks like a pure German shepherd from what I can see," she observed. "Probably around 2 years old, well-fed until recently. Someone's pet, not a stray." Who would leave their dog stranded like this? Leah wondered aloud. "Might not have been intentional," Martin pointed out. "Maybe he ran off during the storm, or was swept from somewhere upstream." On the boulder, the German shepherd's situation was becoming dire. The water had risen to its shoulders, forcing it to stand on its hind legs occasionally to keep its head fully above water. Its cries had become weaker, less frequent, a sign of depleting energy. The community's rescue operation was fully underway now. Steve prepared to enter the kayak, secured with safety lines held by Tom and one of the newcomers on shore. Rebecca had managed to establish a second anchor point on the opposite bank, creating a crude but potentially effective pulley system to control the kayak's movement. "We do this carefully and methodically," Steve instructed the team. "The current is powerful enough to flip this kayak in seconds if we lose control of the lines." Martin kept his focus on the dog, calling encouragement. "Help is coming, buddy. Just a little longer." As Steve positioned himself in the kayak at the entry point, a worrying development occurred on the boulder. A large piece of debris, what looked like a tree branch, came rushing downstream directly toward the rock. The exhausted German shepherd had no time to react before the branch struck the boulder with significant force. The impact dislodged the dog from its precarious position. With a terrified yelp, the German shepherd was swept into the raging current. "He's in the water," Martin shouted, already running downstream along the bank, trying to keep sight of the dog's dark head among the churning waters. The rescue plan instantly shifted. Steve launched the kayak immediately, without waiting for the complete rigging of the guide system. Rebecca and Tom maintained control of the single safety line they had secured, giving Steve as much maneuverability as possible while preventing him from being swept too far downstream. The German shepherd fought desperately against the current, its head occasionally visible above water as it struggled to swim. But the force of the flood was too strong, repeatedly pulling the dog under. "There!" Martin pointed to a spot about 50 yards downstream, where the dog had managed to grab onto another partially submerged obstacle, the roots of a fallen tree extending into the creek. Steve directed the kayak toward this new location, fighting the current with expert precision. The safety team adjusted on shore, moving downstream to maintain the best angle for the rescue line. The dog clung to the tree roots with obvious desperation, clearly at the limit of its endurance. Each time a wave crashed over it, the German Shepherd disappeared briefly beneath the surface, only to resurface gasping and struggling to maintain its tenuous grip. Steve maneuvered the kayak toward the tree roots with skilled precision, fighting against the powerful current that threatened to sweep him past his target. The safety line crew on shore strained to maintain control, giving him just enough slack to advance while preventing him from being pulled downstream. "Almost there," Steve called out, now within 10 feet of where the German Shepherd clung desperately to the gnarled roots. The dog's eyes were wide with terror, its body visibly trembling from cold and exhaustion. Each time a wave washed over it, the animal's grip weakened. It was clearly moments away from losing its battle against the current. "Easy now," Steve said softly as he edged the kayak closer, speaking as much to the frightened dog as to the team controlling his safety line. "Just a little closer." The kayak bumped against the tangle of roots, momentarily startling the German Shepherd, who growled weakly in fear. Steve held his position steady, one hand firmly gripping the roots while the other reached slowly toward the dog. "It's okay, buddy," he said in the same calm tone. "I'm here to help you." From shore, the rescue team watched with bated breath. Martin had rejoined the group after running downstream to follow the dog's progress, and now stood ready with blankets provided by Dr. Patel. "He needs to get that dog now," Rebecca said urgently. "Those roots won't hold much longer." As if confirming her assessment, a large section of the root system suddenly broke free, reducing the dog's precarious handhold by half. The German Shepherd yelped in panic, scrabbling desperately to maintain its position. Steve reacted instantly, lunging forward to grasp the dog's collar. For a heart-stopping moment, it seemed he might capsize the kayak, but his years of river experience kept him balanced even as he leaned dangerously to one side. "Got him!" he shouted, his fingers securing a firm grip on the sodden collar. But the German Shepherd, driven by fear and survival instinct, thrashed wildly, nearly breaking free. Steve knew he had seconds to act before either the dog slipped away or they both ended up in the raging current. "Pull us in," he called to the shore team. "Now!" As the safety line team began hauling the kayak toward shore, Steve made a critical decision. In one swift movement, he pulled the panicking dog into the kayak with him. The craft rocked violently, taking on water as the large, soaking wet animal landed awkwardly across Steve's legs. The shore team increased their pulling speed, recognizing the precarious situation. The kayak, now dangerously overloaded and sitting low in the water, began its journey toward safety. The German Shepherd, though frightened, seemed to realize that struggle would only worsen their situation. It lay trembling across Steve's lap, eyes wild but body unexpectedly still, as if understanding this was its last chance for survival. "Good dog," Steve murmured, keeping one hand firmly on the animal's collar while using the other to help stabilize the waterlogged kayak. "We're almost there." The journey to shore seemed to take an eternity, though in reality it was less than a minute. Every yard gained against the current was a victory, bringing them closer to the waiting hands of the rescue team on the bank. As they neared the shore, Martin and Tom waded into the shallows ready to help secure the kayak and its precious cargo. The German Shepherd, seeing these new humans approaching, began to panic again, struggling weakly to rise. "Easy, boy," Steve soothed. "They're friends, all friends here." When the kayak finally bumped against the muddy bank, many hands reached out simultaneously, some for the craft itself, others for Steve, and several for the trembling dog. In a coordinated effort, they pulled both rescuer and rescued onto solid ground. The moment the German Shepherd felt earth beneath its paws, it attempted to bolt, driven by fear and the instinct to find safety. but exhaustion made its legs buckle and it collapsed onto the muddy shore, sides heaving with exertion. Dr. Patel moved in quickly, her movements calm and deliberate. "Give him space," she instructed, kneeling beside the frightened animal. "He's in shock and terrified." The gathered crowd stepped back, forming a loose circle around the dog. Dr. Patel worked efficiently, checking vital signs while speaking in a low, soothing voice. Martin approached with the thermal blankets, which the vet used to begin drying and warming the shivering animal. "He's severely hypothermic," she reported, "and exhausted, but I don't see any obvious injuries beyond some cuts and scrapes. His pulse is rapid but strong." Steve, now being helped into dry clothes provided by one of the community members, nodded in satisfaction. "He's a fighter, held on longer than most would have." The German Shepherd's eyes darted nervously around the circle of humans, but it made no further attempt to flee. Whether from exhaustion or a growing understanding that these people meant no harm was impossible to tell. "We need to get him somewhere warm," Dr. Patel said. "My clinic isn't far." The question of how to transport the large, frightened dog was answered by Martin, who cautiously approached with one of the blankets held open like a hammock. To everyone's surprise, the German Shepherd allowed this approach, perhaps too weak to resist, or perhaps beginning to trust these humans who had appeared in his moment of greatest need. Enku,